I want to say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you all for being here. If I'm acting a little slow and lethargic, it's because yesterday was a long meeting, or at least it was a long time getting to it, and that was when we voted on the budget. And I'm happy to answer any questions there may be on the budget. If anyone has questions they want to submit during this meetup, Lindsay, tell us how they can do that.
Via our Twitter.
Via our Twitter.
Chairman Mendelson. In the chat boxes on YouTube and Facebook.
And the chat boxes on YouTube and Facebook. Yes. And Lindsay is monitoring all of that right now. So happy to take additional questions. We actually did a meetup a few weeks ago in person, and it was great. There was great turnout, and it was the first time we've done it in person. So the way I see it is there's easier accessibility when we do it via Zoom, but it's much more enjoyable and interactive when it is in person. And if you have a view on that, convey your view on that as well. So I did receive some questions, and I'm going to run through the questions. In the last 5 years, the district and the housing authority have attempted to deal with homelessness by settling thousands of people suffering from homelessness in apartment buildings. More than 1,000 of them receive permanent supportive housing vouchers, meaning that they suffer conditions such as severe mental health or substance use issues, which make them permanently in need of publicly supported housing, PSH vouchers. Many of those voucher recipients have been settled in selected apartment buildings where in some cases they now make up more than half the residents. Do you agree with this policy? I don't agree that there should be that kind of concentration. That is a problem, and I believe it's one of the issues that our housing committee is looking at. I will say this, the way the vouchers work is that there could be somebody in the Department of Human Services who helps to locate a unit that the individual can use via his voucher, or the individual can find the unit on their own because the voucher is with the individual. It's probably more the former, but I will say this. I do not believe that we should be over-concentrating, we should be tipping the balance in apartment buildings with voucher residents. And the reason I believe that this has been happening is because the rents that the housing authority is willing to pay with those vouchers exceeds what the rents are for other market. I'm hesitating for the right way to phrase this. That other individuals don't have vouchers, just folks who are on the market, as opposed to are being subsidized through vouchers. So if the vouchers pay more, some landlords will go to vouchers and not look for anybody else, and that leads to these concentrations, which can be problematic. And the answer there is that the housing authority needs to pay rents in line with what the market is. Why is the council cutting the pay equity fund by $4.4 million before OSSI has a chance to fully implement the pay equity law? Well, actually, OSSI has been implementing the pay equity law, and at this point, I believe we've gone through 2 years. This is the current year, including the current year, which we're in. OSSI has a pretty good chance of what it costs. So what the mayor submitted articulated the right-sized amount for the pay equity fund. That is what she said when she presented the budget. That's what OSSI said when they were asked by several council members at the hearing in early April. I'm looking at some notes here. The mayor's proposed budget for the ECE, Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity, did not align with those BSA amounts, what was articulated in the Budget Support Act that was right sizing it. And so we made a technical adjustment that aligned the budget with the mayor's BSA levels. So we did make an adjustment in the Local Budget Act that was consistent with the Budget Support Act, which was consistent with what the fund actually requires. I remember at the hearing, there was also testimony about different amounts for the cut. And that was because some folks didn't realize that there was actually money in two places, most of it in one, in the fund, and another in OSSI's budget itself. Our understanding is that the funding that is in there is sufficient. That's our belief. That's why that's where we are with the number. I would note that OSSI rolled over about $17 million from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 23 in unspent funds. That was 17 million unspent. The pay equity fund has almost $73 million in it for the current year. It'll have just under 70 million in FY24. The difference being about 3 million, which is not the 4 million that people were talking about. But as I said, there's been significant underspending in the fund over the past few years as the program is ramped up. I think we're now at a point where we understand how much is actually needed. And since we revise the budget every year, if more money is needed in the future, we will have it. I got a question regarding Fort Lincoln, and I don't really know the answer. Fort Lincoln would love to see funding for the indoor pool. It says for the indoor pool in the new recreation center. I'm assuming the questioner actually means to add funding to the budget for a new indoor pool. If that's the case, I don't think there's a flexibility in the capital budget to add that money. And I would add that as I was working on the budget in the last several weeks, that this did not come to my attention. If there had, I would have looked at it, seen whether it's funded or how much it would cost, and would have looked at whether we could add it. But at this point, we would have to cut something, and I don't know what we would cut. I guess I should just say that I don't know more about it, which means it's not a very well-developed proposal as I know it, and that things are pretty much done with the capital budget. And so if there's something to be done there, I'm not exactly sure how it could be done. I had a couple questions related to road safety. There are many violent drivers in Northeast DC, Eckington, Edgewood, who do not have ramifications for their actions, and many of them who are not held accountable. This is a massive concern in the neighborhood where several people have nearly been killed trying to cross the street at a crosswalk. Would the council member please consider legislation on how we can remove these dangerous vehicles and restrict the drivers off the road? Well, if these drivers are driving the way it's alleged, it's already against the law, and so I don't know what law we could pass. I think this is really more about enforcement, and that's enforcement is, I mean, we can't legislate that agencies have to do their job. They have a job, they're supposed to do it. What we can do is oversight hearings, and the questioners should reach out to the Transportation and Environment Committee chaired by Councilmember Allen and ask for oversight hearings with regard to this problem, especially in Eckington and Edgewood. A second question is, booting vehicles seems less effective, as I have seen boots cut off vehicles and they still get away with it. Is there an opportunity to increase towing and impounding egregious violators? I'm trying to remember whether in this budget there's some additional funds for boot enforcement, or whether we did something last year with regard to boot enforcement. But my recollection is that there is a new technology around booting that makes it harder for the boots to be cut off, and also makes it easier for the city to go after those vehicle owners if they try to get away with not paying their boots or cutting them off. So there are some efforts in that regard to increase boot enforcement in the different aspects of it, more boots and ensuring that people can't get away with not paying. I had 3 questions categorized as crime. When are things going to get better regarding violent crime? New York, Minneapolis, and many other large cities are seeing reductions in violent crime in 2023. In DC, it is the opposite, as violent crime is up 12%. Yes, it is concerned that crime is up 12% in the district. I share that concern. I'm not happy about that at all. I'm not so sure that other large cities are actually seeing a reduction, because my understanding is that this is a trend across the country. Not that that really matters, because what does matter is what's happening in DC. I have long advocated that instead of focusing on longer sentences, which research has shown doesn't really have a deterrent effect, that we should be focused on increasing the case closure rate. The last time I checked, somewhere around 50% of homicides are solved in the same year that they occur. Roughly 25% of robberies are solved in the same year they occur. And why do I say in the same year they occur? Because if MPD solves a homicide, announces today that they solved a homicide that occurred in 2020, they count it in their case closure statistics for this year, but it was actually a 2020 homicide. And I am a strong believer in swift and certain justice. That means that when a crime is committed, that the case is solved quickly, that the individual is arrested quickly, that the U.S. attorney prosecutes quickly and aggressively. And aggressively means not plea bargaining a felony to a misdemeanor, or plea bargaining a violent felony to a nonviolent felony. That has ramifications if this is a repeat actor, because the courts, when they make decisions whether to hold somebody pre-trial, look at that individual's record. If there's not a record of violent convictions, has to be conviction, then the court is not likely to hold the person, which is a problem in itself. Swift and certain justice is what there needs to be more attention to, focusing on the repeat offenders because they repeat, increasing the case closure rate, and aggressive prosecution. The other factor that I would emphasize, that I do emphasize with regard to fighting crime, is more attention to the police building community trust. Because the community, when they have the trust of the community will act as their eyes and ears and make it easier to close cases. Next question: when is the earliest council to take up the mayor's crime prevention bill? Well, I find it a little annoying that the mayor suggested that we could pass this legislation before the recess, which is 6 weeks from now, maybe a little bit longer, 7 weeks. The crime bill, which the last I checked had not even been submitted to the council. So she announced it, but we don't have it. But the crime bill, as she has described it, is a pretty complicated document. It absolutely needs a public hearing to sort out these complicated issues. For instance, how much further can we go, if at all, with regard to changing the law for pretrial detention? Under our Constitution, individuals are innocent until found guilty. We all know that. And so under our law, the court can hold an individual only if the court finds that the individual is a risk of flight or is a risk of public safety, that is, that they'll commit a crime while they're out. I haven't even seen the data with regard to offenses committed by folks who are on pretrial release. I know that anecdotally there are stories about that, but statistically, I think it's a minority of the cases. And that just speaks to the urgency of this. How many people are actually committing violent crimes while they are on pretrial release? That just speaks to the urgency of it. Regardless, we should look at it, but it's complicated, and to do this in 6 weeks or 8 weeks is impossible. I will add this as well. The bill's not been introduced. Our rules require that there has to be a hearing. A hearing requires roughly 3 weeks' notice. That means the earliest there could be a hearing would be the middle of June. And then the committee would have to sort through all the testimony and arguments and then come up with a committee print. And then there would have to be 2 votes before July 15th. I think that's highly unlikely, if not impossible. So it's kind of good rhetoric on the mayor's part, but if it was that urgent, she should have introduced it sooner. We have had numerous shootings, carjackings, and robberies in Hill East the past 3 years. Why should I continue to raise my kids in DC when I can have better schools, less crime, better parks, etc. in one of the Virginia or Maryland suburbs? Does the council want to keep families in the district? Let me see. I live on the border of Hill East, around 13th in Pennsylvania. And I feel comfortable in my neighborhood. I'm actually like within a block of Potomac Gardens. But this is an individual choice. And if you, the questioner, don't feel safe, I'm not going to say you have to continue to live in a neighborhood you don't feel safe in. Does the council want to keep families in the district? Yes. Does the council want people to feel safe? Yes. Is the council looking for ways to try to make the city safer? Yes. I totally get it that there are some, like the police union, who believe that the council believes in lawlessness. That's not correct, but the police union disagrees with some of the legislation we've done. And so we can have an argument about that. I used to chair the committee on judiciary, means I dealt with public safety for 8 years as my primary responsibility within the council. And as I said before, I think there are strategies that the mayor can pursue, because it is the mayor who, through the chief, can increase the closure rate. But I think the legislation that the police union has been very critical of, I think they're dead wrong when they say that it makes the city less safe, because I think they're wrong about that. Allowing police to bargain their discipline, which is what the primary controversy has been with the police union, according to research, makes it more likely there'll be bad cops on the force. Bad cops on the force means it's more likely that the U.S. attorney will not take those cases to prosecution if one of these bad actor cops is involved in the arrest or the evidence. I don't think that ends up with better public safety, but the union is making that argument. And maybe I misunderstand what the questioner is saying, but I think it's that a view that the bills that we've passed have would make the city less safe, and I don't agree. And I'm happy to follow up if there are more questions on that. The last question on crime is, what are you doing to make more people want to sign up to be police officers? We don't have enough. I agree there aren't enough. I looked at this several weeks ago when I testified before Congress, because I knew they would press us on this. We are struggling in the same way as other cities. New York City, if I remember correctly, has thousands of vacancies. The cities across the country have vacancies on their police forces. The mayor's proposed a number of incentives, and with this budget, we made no changes in the incentives. I did actually, to tell you the truth, and I haven't said this before, I did look at cutting some of the money in the incentives because it just wasn't going out the door. And I decided not to do that. And what do I mean by that? That there's an incentive, for example, to subsidize or support housing for police officers in the city. There's a bonus, signing bonus. And I think on one of them, one of those, and then there are a couple others, one of them According to the financial records that, the financial accounting system, only a couple $100 had been spent, and there was like $1.5 million in the program. But in the end, I chose not to cut it. So every incentive that the mayor's requested, the council's funded, and with this coming budget, and all but one of the incentives that she requested in the last budget, we funded. The one that we didn't was take-home vehicles. We didn't think that take-home vehicles would really be a way to get police officers to apply, to get people to apply to be police officers. Among other things, they, as being junior members of a department, wouldn't be getting take-home vehicles. There were a couple of questions regarding schools. What is the council doing to make sure schools in Ward 7 and 8 aren't having their budgets cut every year? We have to support our most vulnerable students, not punish them for their circumstances. I completely agree. We passed legislation last fall that I authored called Schools First in Budgeting. DCPS got roughly 60, 70, $80 million more this year. I don't remember the exact number offhand. So let's just say 70 million more. However, 80 schools were cut. And that's because the way the DCPS or the chancellor developed the budget was central first, not schools first. What we did was we reversed that, and we took that growth in DCPS funding and we put it first in schools. Now, I don't mean by that we increased schools by 80 million because we didn't. What we did was we looked at every school's budget and we added, I'm stating this simplistically, we looked at every school's budget for the current year, added 5%, and that's their budget next year. So no school got cut. There are some folks who have expressed concern that we hurt Central because we took money from Central. We actually took money from vacant positions and took some what are called NPS, that's like contract funds that weren't being used. What we also did, which is a benefit more to Ward 7 and 8 than a ward like Ward 3, was that we not only restored the at-risk concentration weight, we increased it. The at-risk concentration weight is additional dollars that go directly to the school, not to Central, that have the principal has discretion over, and those dollars are calculated by looking at the population of this school that's over 40% at-risk students, and a second weight over 70% at-risk students. So take a school in Ward 3 which has no at-risk students, it gets no additional money through the at-risk concentration weight. Take a school in Ward 8, let's say Flora Henley, where I remember correctly, about 90% of the students are at risk. It will get, on a per pupil basis, a 0.5, might be 0.05% more for every student at 40%, and at 70% another. Did I say 0.05? It's 0.07 because we increased the weight, which adds up to, for these schools with large at-risk populations, adds up to, I'm going to say around $100,000. Maybe less, but for instance, there was a school, I met with the principal a couple of months ago. She got about $30,000 from this at-risk concentration weight. If I remember correctly, her school had about 40% at-risk students. And she used that money to purchase a reading curriculum to focus on better teaching students how to read. So it makes a difference. That's what we're doing to be sure that schools in Ward 7 and 8 aren't having their budgets cut, is that we reversed what the chancellor proposed, made sure every school is getting their current year budget plus 5%, and then added to the at-risk concentration weight. The next question is, in this year's budget, you're recommending a pretty significant reduction in positions in DCPS's central office to fund more money going directly to schools. While I support money going to schools, I'm concerned that the reduction will impact DCPS's operation. What, if any, impacts do you believe the reduction will have? Well, out of a $1.2 billion budget for DCPS, we cut about $3 million out of central related to positions. And as I said, the positions we identified were vacant. We also, there was a back and forth between my office and DCPS about the positions that we identified, that there were some that they felt they really, really wanted, and they identified other positions that we could take, even though they won't say that publicly. So I'm not too concerned that we have severely impacted DCPS's operations. I actually not sure we impacted them otherwise. Other than that, they were hoping to have more money and be a little bit bigger, and that's not where the priority should be. We did cut some funding in NPS, a larger amount, about $17 million. But we did not cut specific contracts, and DCPS continues to have a broad latitude in how they actually spend the dollars that they have. And that gets into the technicalities of budgeting. But the bottom line is that I am not concerned that DCPS has been impacted in their operations, only in their growth at DC Central. The last question I have concerns a street or alley in Foggy Bottom. And this is the question: Snow's Court. Snow's Court residents are dealing with aging infrastructure, negligent utility trash companies, and unresponsive DC agencies. Mayor Bowser's budget excluded alley infrastructure funds for Snow's Court and Ward 2 alley rehabilitation. Will residents just need to endure more raw sewage backups into their homes for the next 7 years as public tree roots occlude sewer mains and aging mains collapse in on themselves under the alley? Okay, so there are a few things in here. First of all, the sewer system is managed by DC Water, and DC Water has a responsibility to ensure that the sewer system works. Second, my understanding is that DDOT, Department of Transportation, believes that Snow's Court is actually a private street. We have private streets around the city, and therefore DDOT is not responsible for maintaining the street. I have been in contact with Councilmember Pinto's office, who's much more familiar with the issues on Snow's Court, and we'll work with her to see what we can do to help. If the street is not, or the alley, I'll say, if Snow's Court is not a public street or public alley in the records of the district, it becomes more complicated. But I'm going to try to understand the ownership and then approach the city with regard to as much responsibility as we can insist that they take to ensure that Snow's Court is adequately maintained. I don't know that I can give a better answer there. But as I said, I think the first issue is figuring out the ownership of the alley or Snow's Court, and then addressing the issues from there. That was the
questioner said that the alley. By the way, the questioner's in the chat box. Just so you know.
Okay. Well, as I said, I was in touch with Councilmember Pinto's office, and what I was told is that DDOT maintains that it's not a public alley. So we have the questioner saying it is, we have DDOT saying it isn't, and we'll sort that out. But this isn't the first time that I have gotten involved with a street or alley where DDOT disclaims responsibility, and we think that they do have responsibility. Lindsay, other questions?
Okay, question is, home visitors like childcare teachers have been some of the most dedicated yet underpaid professionals working with district families and children for years. How can our home visiting programs maintain a healthy workforce without raises? I'm not certain home visitors specifically what that.
I think the question, which I hope people could hear, pertains to home care workers. And it is my understanding that the wages that the city will pay through Medicaid have not gone up and that they need to go up. That's a complicated process that works its way through healthcare finance. I don't believe healthcare finance proposed it to the mayor, or in any event that the mayor proposed it to the council. And so this is an issue that the questioner should press with the Committee on Health, chaired by Councilmember Christina Henderson. Because clearly, if the wages have not gone up in several years, over the next year, they'll just fall farther behind and we're going to have to deal with it. So I support the idea of ensuring adequate wages. I recognize that it will be harder to have a sufficient number of workers if the wages are too low. But as I said, this is a very complicated process of rate setting through healthcare finance, and the Health Committee is the appropriate place for the oversight. Lindsay?
This is a question we got from Twitter. DC downtown is not returning to pre-pandemic occupancy. Many workers are leaving their jobs or taking pay cuts due to traffic and tickets. Any ideas for repurposing downtown and K Street?
Sure. So the council has joined with the mayor in saying repeatedly that the federal government needs to bring its workers back to work. That would make a big difference in terms of downtown activity and the high vacancy rate. The part of the question involves K Street. The council came to feel, I would say almost unanimously, that the K Street plan that the mayor has made a lot of noise about, because she was unhappy that the Committee on Transportation proposed cutting the capital project, that the plan, which was developed 10 years ago, based on pre-pandemic commuter patterns, as well as assumptions from a decade ago about a multi-modality on streets, that plan needs to be refreshed. So what we did was we pulled the money out of that project and used it for other purposes. We left about $5 million in the project for redoing the plan. This is not meant to be a 3-year effort. I'm hopeful that over the next year that they will revise the plan. As I said to the city administrator, the mayor or DDOT has got to work with the property owners downtown to get their support. And the DDOT and the mayor have to work with the council, and in particular the Transportation Committee, to have their support. Councilmember Allen, who chairs that committee, has been very clear. He recognizes the value of redoing K Street, but I think he was one who noted that having a plan that 7 lanes with 2 of them for buses and the rest for cars didn't seem like it was the best approach, and toward a multimodal right-of-way. And so getting his support, which means working with him on refreshing the plan, getting the property owners downtown to support, they're the ones who are most impacted. If K Street is ripped up for a couple of years, they're not getting any new tenants. And that means their vacant buildings are just going to be more underwater in terms of their finances. And so getting their support is critical as well. And then we can go forward. The mayor has in her proposed budget, which we left, money to refresh Farragut Square, the park. I don't know that it makes that much difference. The mayor says it makes a difference. I didn't know that Farragut Square was right now detriment to the downtown revival. I think she's thinking in terms of what they did to Franklin Square. Franklin Square was in pretty bad condition before it got refreshed. But the challenge to me is that the city doesn't own Farragut Square, and the Park Service learned of this plan through the budget discussions. And what the Park Service said at a meeting of the National Capital Planning Commission is not only was this news to them, by the way, I sit on NCPC, not only was this news to them, but nothing's going to happen there without it being negotiated with the Park Service. And I know that the Park Service is more than happy to take city money to refurbish its properties. So that's not the issue. But how it gets refurbished, what happens, they absolutely care about. And there's been no discussion by the mayor's people. No discussion. Only the mayor put it in the budget to the council. We did leave the money in there. I think that for recovery of downtown, we need to look at quick solutions. The long-term solutions like getting more housing built downtown, that could take 10 years. And whether downtown recovers has got to happen in the next couple of years. Think of it. If downtown continues to lose retail tenants, there are fewer restaurants, people are less interested and then start to feel less safe downtown because it's sort of a lot of emptiness. Downtown could hit a slide like we saw in the 1970s, 1980s. If we can get people back downtown, activate the space, so you get the federal workers to come back, you do more in terms of entertainment, like our theaters, do more to support our theaters, which has been a struggle, and have more like weekend events that bring people downtown. All of this will give more customers for retail and for restaurants, and that will activate downtown, and that will help with the recovery. These things, we need to be looking at short-term strategies like that. Another one is to take retail spaces in the city, subsidize pop-ups in those retail spaces that are vacant. So you're walking down the street right now, they're vacant storefronts. You walk down the street and there's a pop-up art shop, a pop-up made in DC shop, whatever you want, but pop-ups that we could subsidize. Just to create more activity. Those things will turn things around. In this budget, we added $3 million at Councilmember Pinto's request for retail grants to help support or attract retail businesses downtown. She also put money, Councilmember Pinto put money in the budget through her committee markup for public safety grants. It would be targeted on specific needs at downtown. Just strategies that are more short-term that will have an impact on activating. And that, I think, is the way to go with recovery. Lindsay?
I think this questioner may have missed part of what you said, but they said, why are we providing local funds to refresh a federal park in the first place, particularly given their increased disrespect of home rule?
Well, I don't know if you all heard that. Why are we putting local funds in for a federal park, especially given the disrespect of home rule? The National Park Service has not been disrespecting home rule. It's been the Republicans in Congress. The proposal came from the mayor. The mayor didn't talk to the Park Service, but this would not be the first time that the city has put some money into federal park land because it benefits the district. Franklin Square comes to mind, where the city put, I think, $20 or $30 million into refurbishing that park. I do think we should do it on a limited basis.
Okay, is the chairman concerned about the excluded workers funds swiped by the mayor in the budget?
I absolutely dislike the mayor's swiping of those funds. But given the many different pressing needs, we were not able to replace those funds. It was about $20 million. And, even at yesterday's legislative meeting on the budget, where I had been able to find funds to restore emergency rental assistance and restore access to justice and restore the cuts to victim services funds and domestic violence support groups, where I was able to restore cuts that the mayor made to housing inspectors to make sure that tenants, particularly in lower income properties, have decent housing. in spite of all that, there were still demands from, maybe I shouldn't say demands, requests from council members for more with regard to, for instance, food assistance. And there was a lot of discussion about SNAP. They're just given the priorities and the limited dollars, we were not able to find dollars to replace what the mayor cut for excluded workers. So excluded workers are individuals who did not get unemployment insurance when the federal government increased unemployment insurance back in 2020. They were workers, but they were not eligible because they were like gig workers, self-employed, did not get unemployment insurance. The council last year put 20 million in the budget through Events DC. The committee with oversight did not follow through to see that Events DC got that money out the door last fall. And as a result, the money was still sitting there this spring and the mayor took it and used it to balance her budget. And it was too hard to replace that. We did put money in the budget in 2021 for excluded workers, so it's not like we didn't address it at all, but it was far less than what they thought it should be, and the council agreed last year it should be more. And as I said, the mayor took that.
Is there a penalty for the administration ignoring the school's first law? I can't imagine people contemplated that when writing the law, but is there any enforcement mechanism?
There ought to be an enforcement mechanism for the mayor flagrantly disregarding the school's first law. The chancellor testified in January, he wasn't going to follow it this year, he'd follow it next year. And that's just wrong. But there isn't an enforcement penalty that I can think of. And why do I say that? So let's just play this out hypothetically. We passed a law. Schools are supposed to get an increase in 5% because that's what the UPSFF increase was. And whatever's left over can go to central. The mayor and the chancellor disregard that. So I sue, the council sues. You didn't follow the law. And we go to court. And I don't know what argument the mayor would make, but I know what the court would say, which is, well, but excuse me, council, you're actually the appropriators, not the mayor. And so you can fix what she did. And that's the end of the case. Well, that's what we did. We fixed what she did, fixed how she did it wrong. And I just don't know that there's an enforcement penalty. Because really all we have is going to court, and the court would say, well, but we're able to remedy it ourselves and don't need the court to remedy it. It's wrong what she did. It's wrong what the chancellor did. I think it's actually a bit more scandalous. Not only can you not improve quality education when you are cutting money from a school that has a large number of kids who are struggling with learning, just are struggling. I'm thinking again, Flora Henley, 90% of the kids roughly are at risk. The number of kids who are testing at proficient in reading or math is, if I remember correctly, in the single digits. And it needs more resources, and cutting them hundreds of thousands of dollars, meaning to have fewer teachers next year than they already were cut last year. That's just not a way to improve educational outcomes. That's wrong. It's scandalous. I just don't see the commitment by the chancellor to public education for these kids. But worse than that, those who are active with schools know that this at-risk funding is supposed to supplement, not supplant budgets. So a school has a budget of, let's say, $1 million, and we put some at-risk dollars to the school. That means they now have a budget of $1,100,000, not $1 million. It's just that some of it is funded with at-risk. That's the difference between supplement versus, supplement versus supplant. The council last year, because the at-risk money, which is substantial, has just ended up supplanting school budgets. We created this new at-risk concentration weight. And for the current school year, it supplemented these schools' budget. But when the chancellor sent down the school budgets, he took the at-risk concentration money that we had put towards schools and supplanted the school budgets. It was embedded in them. So if a school had a budget last year of $1 million plus 100,000. This year, it had a budget of $1 million. And so we, through Schools First, we corrected that and then we added to it. So the at-risk is supplementing, but the chancellor just didn't get it. And I just think it's so wrong that even in terms of equity, that the chancellor took the additional at-risk money and ended up just supplanting dollars. That was a long answer, but I hope that helped.
A follow-up on excluded workers. At yesterday's meeting, the chairman said one reason we should not extend the sunset of the deed and recordation tax was because of promises made to developers and businesses. Why do those promises matter more?
Good question. Why did the promises matter more? The violator of the promise regarding the excluded workers was the mayor. She's the one who took the money. She didn't support it in the first place, so she got her way. As a matter of priorities, we were unable to rectify that. With regard to the deed taxes downtown, the deed taxes around the city, it would especially affect downtown because those properties are far more valuable, and therefore the tax has much more of an impact. The deed recordation and transfer taxes, the amount that was at issue was a 2% of the value of the transaction, which for, let's say, $100 million building is $2 million. $2 million is a lot of dollars, and it discourages investors. Investors right now are looking to other cities and not to DC. If we want to revitalize downtown, we've got to get investment dollars coming back. I realized some of the partisans who wanted to see this tax increase said, well, but these are foreign investors. Well, it doesn't matter. They're investors. And it does matter that the district has gone from like number 4 in terms of attractiveness for investors in the country to like one of the least attractive cities in the country to invest in. And that's not the way downtown's going to recover. So I did make the argument that we made a promise 4 years ago that when the mayor had proposed increasing the tax, and we had no choice but to go along because it brought in a substantial amount of money to balance the budget. And we didn't feel like cutting all the programs that the mayor had proposed. So we went along, but we went along on a temporary basis and said it would sunset in 4 years. And that's a promise that we made. Yes, the questioner can say, well, why is one promise more important than the other? And that's a tough question to answer, but I would say that there's significant collateral damage from breaking the promise over the tax increase. Because if we don't get investors, downtown is going to be harder to recover. And all of the social justice programs that we provide are benefit from the taxes we get from downtown. It is the golden goose. I mean, it is the golden goose. And if we don't protect the golden goose, which means the taxes that we get, which are substantial in the hundreds and hundreds of millions, if not billions, if we don't protect those taxes and incentivize more taxes, we're not going to be able to pay for all the other programs.
Do you anticipate additional amendments to the budget? If so, please share what they might include.
Oh, I do think that there'll be some amendments, but I think they will be relatively minor, and I don't know what they would be. I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with Councilmember Gray's office the other day. There's a rec center that needs some transportation because there's construction going on right now. It's Joy Evans. And I think the cost of the transportation is something like $30,000. And so there might be an amendment to fund that. Any amendments at this point, I think, are going to be minor. But we'll see. I guess I want to be clear about this. We have 2 votes on the budget because we have 2 votes on all legislation. But the budget is somewhat unique. The second vote isn't an opportunity to completely rewrite the budget. This is a $19 billion budget that is precariously balanced. And to make any change requires another change, which could then have a cascading consequence. So anybody who thinks they're going to make major changes or rewrite it extensively, not going to happen. But some minor tweaks there could be. Lindsay?
Okay, now that Congress has voted to overturn our laws multiple times, do you think this will be a trend? And how can they vote on legislation that has already become law?
Okay, so I'm very critical of how the mayor handled the criminal code revision, allowing the narrative that it actually made the city less safe was not only factually wrong, and this was maybe a longer conversation for some who think that somehow the mayor was right, but it was factually wrong, but it was especially wrong for her to play into the hands of the Republicans in Congress. She was their talking points when they moved to overturn that legislation. And the council did not do a very good job of explaining the revised criminal code when we adopted it last fall, or even explaining it very well when this issue started to emerge in Congress in January. By the time we got engaged, it was too late. The Republicans had succeeded in their framing of the bill. Now, why am I talking about the revised criminal code? Because it was such a disaster that it emboldened the Republicans to try again with the next bill, which was the police accountability bill. The police accountability bill had one major enemy, and that was the FOP, primarily because it took away their ability to bargain discipline. Didn't take away their ability to bargain, even though that was their talking point. It only took away, but this was important to them, their ability to bargain discipline. To make it so hard for the chief to fire a police officer that, for example, there was a police officer who raped a co-ed, a drunk girl. This was maybe 7, 8 years ago. And the chief fired him. And the discipline process was so cumbersome because of the way the FOP had negotiated it that a different chief was ordered to reinstate that officer. And that officer is no good for policing because with that kind of allegation in his history, the U.S. attorney could never use him at a trial. So there was no good that came out of that, but that was the discipline process that the FOP had negotiated, and this was not unique here. It's a problem across the country. What is unique is that we're one of the few jurisdictions that has a union that the union cannot bargain its discipline. That is seen as a major, major reform. The rest of the bill a lot of it was modeled after provisions that people have been debating for years, that would have been urging for years to improve police accountability. But the FOP was opposed, and the Republicans were emboldened because of the revised criminal code debacle, and so that had wind under its sails, and that's why it got to the House. The other part of the question is, well, how can the Congress override a bill that has already passed legislative review? I don't think it can. And we got a legal opinion from the Attorney General, the DC Attorney General, that the bill became law in April. The Senate voted yesterday to overturn it. Way too late. This is going to play out somehow. When the United States Senate or Congress insists that they've overturned our law, that has to be dealt with. But I don't think they have a leg. Well, I don't think they don't have a leg to stand on. The Home Rule Act couldn't be clearer. It says that the count starts on the day we transmit. What the Senate parliamentarian has opined in the past is that the count starts on the day they publish it in the congressional record. That's not what the law says. What the parliamentarian ruled last week was that it would be in order to debate this resolution, even if it was after the 60 days. Criminal bills get 60 days. But this is outside of the congressional review period, and there's not a provision in the Home Rule Act that says they can overturn a bill after the 60 days has passed. This will get sorted out, but in my view, it is law. And actually, most of this has been law since 2020 when it was first passed on a temporary basis by the council. And that's where we are.
All right,
A couple more questions.
the clarifying question from earlier about home visitors. So apparently home visitors are trained professionals who provide services to parents and children who are expecting or have young children. They're not funded through Medicaid, but through DC Health and CFSA. Is there funding, they're saying 700K in fund, is there funding to give these professional raises?
Okay, so apparently my answer earlier about home care aides was different than what the questioner intended, and the questioner was asking about home care workers who are not Medicaid, are funded through our Medicaid program, but funded through Child and Family Services Agency or the Department of Health. And therefore, those agencies have the ability to direct higher wages, which would make sense. The issue did not come before me as we were doing the budget. I don't even know if it came before the Health Committee. If it did, clearly the Health Committee did not put additional money in the budget, and it would be too late to put the money in the budget now, because as I said, we passed a balanced budget, and to put more money, to fund something new is going to mean we have to cut something. The example I gave earlier was something like $30,000, and it's not hard to find $30,000 to cut from one program to put into another, but this appears to be more expensive and probably also needs more research. Certainly, I don't know anything more about it, and so I think it's unlikely with this budget.
I see the council has kept the crime scene investigations unit and DFS in the budget. Curious how this is going to work with Councilmember Allen's bill that would move crime out of the executive branch and make it independent.
There's not conflict at all. So I don't know if you all heard the question. I'll sort of touch on the different parts of it. It had to do with the Department of Forensic Science and with the crime scene services division within the Department of Forensic Science, which the mayor had proposed to move to MPD. And she claimed that this would help with Department of Forensic Science regaining its accreditation. I disagree. The accreditation has to do with how it handles DNA evidence. That is analyzing DNA and ensuring that its analysis follows all the necessary scientific protocols. Crime scene searches, the technicians who are out in the field picking up evidence from the field and from a crime scene, and that's not what was questioned or challenged in the when the lab lost its accreditation. So the mayor proposed transferring crime scene services. The council disagreed. We said it should stay with the Department of Forensic Science. Now the questioner asked, doesn't this interfere with Councilmember Allen's legislation that the council approved last fall to make the lab independent? No, it doesn't, because it just means that crime scene services remains with the lab, which according to the legislation is independent. But I have to note that the legislation that Councilmember Allen moved last fall was subject to funding. It had a cost, and the council was unable to fund it. So right now, that law that Councilmember Allen moved through the council last fall is not in effect. So that's really an aside. Keeping crime scene services with Department of Forensic Science has nothing to do with whether it's independent or not. Has nothing to do with whether the lab is independent or not. I do think, though, the crime scene services should remain with the lab because we need evidence collecting outside of MPD. Just well, I'm pausing here because it's a little hard to explain, but the whole idea behind having an independent forensic lab is that the police make the arrests, the lab independently analyzes the data, and then the prosecutors and defense use the results from the forensic lab in there to prosecute or defend cases. Crime scene services should be separate, and the independence is a different issue. Sorry, I think I kind of confused all that. Do we have any other questions, Lindsay? I'm told there are no other questions. We've been an hour. I think I prefer the in-person because there's a little bit more interchange, and that actually is a lot more interchange, and I enjoyed that. We had a great turnout last time. I'm going to talk with my staff about it, whether our next month's meetup will be in person or virtual. I want to thank everybody who participated today. Thank you for all the questions. I hope this was helpful, and I hope I will see you around